Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you.
Aye, aye, Captain!
Oh, who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
SpongeBob SquarePants!
Whose game adaptations lack quality?
SpongeBob SquarePants!
If digital nonsense be something you wish,
SpongeBob SquarePants!
Then you'd better take a good look at this list.
SpongeBob SquarePants!
Okay, that's quite enough of that.
the little yellow trouser-wearing SpongeBob SquarePants has been entertaining children the world over with his underwater shenanigans since 1999. Created by marine biologist, animator and writer the late Stephen Hillenburg, SpongeBob can generally be found getting into all sorts of nautical nonsense with underwater pal Patrick Star, long-suffering neighbour Squidward Tentacles, who is somewhat confusingly an octopus, and pet sea snail Gary.
Having been an icon of kids' TV for well over 2 decades now, there's little wonder that SpongeBob hasn't remained confined to the small screen, and he's found himself starring in movies, comic books, and our favourite digital medium, video games.
It may shock you to find out that there are dozens of video games bearing the good name of SpongeBob SquarePants, and if you've ever wondered which are shiny pearls and which are, well, just pants, then you've come to the right place.
Before we get carried away bestowing judgment on SpongeBob's video game back catalogue though, we probably better establish a few rules. For today's ranked list, we've trawled through the archives to find every video game bearing the good name of the absorbent yellow porous protagonist, and sorted them from somewhat fishy to whale good. It's like well good. We've taken into account critical reception and user reviews, and then run everything through our patented ranking machine, which judges those with fewer professional reviews more harshly.
We've excluded a handful of games with absolutely no reviews, professional or otherwise, as it's hard to determine if a game's any good if no one's played the darn thing and shared their thoughts on the matter. We're also excluding mobile-only titles, because they tend to be poo-poo plops anyway, as well as titles released for tvOS, as they kind of fall into the same category.
Additionally, we won't be counting games where SpongeBob isn't the headline act, so you won't see his turn in Power Wash Simulator here. Finally, we'll only be separating handheld and PC versions of games from their home console counterparts if there's serious disparity in quality between the two.
All of that nice and clear? Then let's rank 'em. I'm Goofy Goober Ben.
And I'm the polo shirt wearing octopus that has to deal with him, Peter from Triple Jump. And here is every SpongeBob SquarePants video game, ranked from worst to best.
The Unrankables: SpongeBob SquarePants Darts 2003 PC, SpongeBob SquarePants Collapse 2003 PC, SpongeBob SquarePants 3D Obstacle Odyssey 2005 PC, SpongeBob Obstacle Odyssey 2 Time Trouble 2006 PC, SpongeBob SquarePants The Game of Life 2008 PC, SpongeBob SquarePants Monopoly 2008 PC, and SpongeBob's Truth or Square SpongeBob SquarePants 2009 PC. There are a few games in SpongeBob's back catalogue that we're just not able to rank, either because nobody bothered to review them or because they've been lost to time, and as a result, we don't actually know if they're any good or not. SpongeBob SquarePants Collapse is a puzzler released in 2003 for PC, though in fairness, calling it a puzzle game might be a bit generous, as all players need to do is click on groups of 3 or more coloured blocks to remove them from the screen. We couldn't find any reviews for this one, professional or user. However, had critics actually gotten their hands on it, we can't imagine they'd have been too impressed, as the gameplay is hardly groundbreaking, and aside from having SpongeBob's face plastered all over it, the game really has very little to do with the franchise. 3D Obstacle Odyssey and its sequel, Obstacle Odyssey 2 Time Trouble, also failed to meet the criteria for this list, again owing to the fact that nobody reviewed them. Both titles are of the 3D platform variety, and we're not surprised that they didn't capture the attention of the gaming public. Both games look fine for the time they were released, but the gameplay is quite simplistic, uninventive and repetitive, and they lack the TV series' trademark goofy humour. The 2 board game titles in SpongeBob's back catalogue, SpongeBob SquarePants The Game of Life and SpongeBob SquarePants Monopoly, didn't manage to make the cut either, again due to lack of reviews. If you've ever played the board game versions of The Game of Life or Monopoly though, you'll know exactly what to expect from from both of these games. We also can't count SpongeBob SquarePants Darts, not because no one reviewed it, props to the one critic at IGN that braved the game, but because footage of it is rarer than rocking horse droppings. Apparently though, if you like darts, it's not bad. The final unrankable is 2009's SpongeBob's Truth or Square SpongeBob SquarePants, a game that went missing for a good chunk of time before being unearthed by internet SpongeBob superfans. Somewhat akin to the likes of Mario Party, Truth or Square tasks players with completing minigames to help SpongeBob find the Krabby Patty formula in time for the Krusty Krab's 117th anniversary. Right, now we've covered what didn't make it, let's have a look at what did, shall we? Number 33. SpongeBob SquarePants Operation Krabby Patty, 2001. PC. We begin today's ranking proper with SpongeBob's first foray into the world of PC gaming, and whilst Operation Krabby Patty is about as appealing as the Nasty Patty, the one positive to take away is that things only got better for the butter-coloured sea sponge's gaming career from there. Anyone booting up Operation Krabby Patty would be treated, if you can call it that, to two separate stories, one in which SpongeBob wakes up on the wrong side of bed and Plankton kidnaps Gary, and one where he wakes up on the right side of bed and Plankton builds a robot replica of Mr. Krabs in order to steal the Krabby Patty recipe. The game itself was broken up into a bunch of mini-games which tasked players with mind-numbing activities like collecting the ingredients for a Krabby Patty or attending driving lessons. Try as we might, we were unable to find any professional reviews for this one, and our writer certainly wasn't willing to part with her own cash in order to play it herself, so we've had to look to Joe Public for their thoughts, and those thoughts were thus: Operation Krabby Patty is not a very good game. The main gripes were directed at the graphics, which were considered to be lackluster even for the time, the tedious, repetitive gameplay and music that gave everyone that heard it the urge to make like Van Gogh and chop off both of their ears. Astonishingly, according to the Interactive Digital Software Association, Operation Krabby Patty was the 20th best-selling PC game of 2002, and shifted more units than the PC versions of games like The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, games which are often listed amongst the best of all time. There's no accounting for taste, I suppose. Number 32. SpongeBob's Truth or Square, 2009. Xbox 360, Wii, DS, and PSP. No, you don't have deja vu, and we haven't made some sort of egregious error. There are two games out there, both released in 2009, that go by the name of SpongeBob's Truth or Square. This version for consoles is quite different to the Lost and Then Found Again PC game, but tells a very similar story. Mr. Krabs has entrusted SpongeBob with the Krabby Patty formula, a mistake. However, being the goofy goober he is, SpongeBob immediately forgets what he's done with it. Rather than calling on one of his many friends to help him find it, he enlists the help of Plankton, who has tried to steal the formula for himself more times than I can count, and I can count to at least 12. 10. I thought I had more fingers. The two use Plankton's memory machine to recall the happiest moments of SpongeBob's life, but Plankton, being the sneaky git he is, has planted robots inside the memories, and so not only does SpongeBob have to contend with having forgotten what he's done with the formula, but also angry robots. In each memory, SpongeBob must explore, defeat enemies, and collect coins, with occasional boss battles breaking up the fun. You may be wondering how a sea sponge could possibly take on killer robots, and the answer is that SpongeBob has the ability to transform into a variety of objects, including a spatula and a cannon. Yes, the actual gameplay was considered mediocre but not bad by most critics, but it was the graphics, camera, and audio that let Truth or Square down. An overly garish colour palette failed to mask substandard visuals, the camera was tricky to get to grips with, and the repeated voice lines soon got on players' nerves. Sorry, SpongeBob, the truth hurts, doesn't it? Like the name of this, that was the name of the game. Moving on. Number 31. SpongeBob Hero Pants, 2015. Xbox 360, PlayStation Vita, and 3DS. If this channel had been around in 2015, buff Squidward would definitely have made it onto our hunkiest video game boys 2015 to 16 list. Just look at those biceps, for wowza! Sadly, Spank Bank Squidward was just about the only thing that SpongeBob Hero Pants had going for it. SpongeBob Hero Pants is an action-adventure platformer based on the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water, which should probably tell you all you need to know. When SpongeBob arrives at the Krusty Krab one one morning, he thinks he's going to have a normal day at work. However, he, Sandy, and Patrick are greeted by the sight of Mr. Krabs, Plankton, and Squidward being chased around the restaurant by random objects. Bubbles soon appears from a space triangle and tells them that someone is using the final page from the magic book, seen in the movie, to make crazy stuff happen, and he bestows SpongeBob and his friends with superpowers so that they can save Bikini Bottom. Characters start out in their normal form and can only utilize their new abilities once a meter is filled by defeating enemies, at which point they can enter superhero mode and utilize special attacks. Though some of the show's charm was there and it was filled to the brim with hunky boys, SpongeBob Hero Pants didn't have a lot to offer players. The gameplay failed to conjure up anything new and after a while became somewhat dull and repetitive. Some of the mechanics, like the one that prevented the characters from jumping and attacking at the same time, proved irritating to players, and glitches were a frequent occurrence. Kiddos who enjoyed the film might have had fun with SpongeBob Hero Pants, but that's really the best thing we can say about it. Number 30. SpongeBob's Surf and Skate Road Trip, 2011, Xbox 360 and 3DS. Great news, everyone! SpongeBob's Surf and Skate Road Trip uses the Kinect. I knew you'd all be pleased. Indeed, as though it's not difficult enough to make a decent licensed game, developer Blitz Games decided to make things even harder on themselves by throwing the Kinect into the mix. I don't think you need me to tell you the results were lackluster. The game requires players to stand sideways on in front of their Kinect and move their feet in order to control the in-game character, who is atop either a surfboard or a skateboard, and avoid any obstacles that may be in their path. Each level has various challenges to complete, such as passing through gates or collecting items, but although the action on screen varies, what's required of the player doesn't. The 3DS version of the game is quite similar in premise, but instead of using their entire bodies to control SpongeBob and friends, players use the 3DS's buttons. That sounds a lot better, actually. Critics didn't exactly take to SpongeBob's Surf and Skate Road Trip, mostly because the level of interaction required from the player was fairly minimal, and unless you were the sort of person who'd get excited just shuffling their feet around, it really wasn't all that much fun. There was a small amount of enjoyment to be had initially, and it was probably a laugh playing with friends and watching them make fools of themselves, but imprecise controls in the case of the 360 version and the repetitiveness of the gameplay in both the home and handheld console offerings made the game hard to recommend. Number 29. SpongeBob's Boating Bash, 2010, Wii and DS. From surfing to boating now, as we take a look at SpongeBob's Boating Bash, a driving title for the Wii and DS. Poor SpongeBob has once again failed his boating test, but not to worry, because just as he sat on the steps of Mrs. Puff's boating school feeling rather sorry for himself, a shark by the name of Seymour Scales shows up and offers him the chance to join his drive classes. What a generous guy. Scales isn't running any old driving school, however, and proceeds to teach SpongeBob how to drive recklessly and destroy other vehicles. Played alone or with friends, SpongeBob's Boating Bash offers players the opportunity to engage in a variety of Destruction Derby-style modes, including Recklessness, in which they must smash into other boats to collect points, Impairment, where they must knock out their opponents within a time limit, and Escape, which sees opponents hunting down the player. Whilst all of this may sound good in theory, the execution was way off. As was often the case with Wii titles, SpongeBob's Boating Bash controlled horribly, but although you might be quick to blame the Wiimote, things were no better on the DS. Additionally, the AI opponents were far too good, and as such, the game was incredibly challenging in places, even for the adults who were reviewing it, so Lord knows how the small children it was aimed at would have fared. With that said, kids would have probably had a good time with all of the chaos, and even if they couldn't beat it, the bright colours and loud noises would have kept them entertained for hours, so it's not all bad. Number 28. SpongeBob SquarePants Plankton's Robotic Revenge, 2013. PS3, Xbox 360, Wii, Wii U, DS, and 3DS. Look out, everyone! Plankton's up to his old tricks again. Oh, what's he like, eh? In SpongeBob SquarePants Plankton's Robotic Revenge, a cargo ship has accidentally dumped a load of batteries into the ocean, but don't worry about any kind of environmental disaster because Plankton's on hand to put them to good use. And by good use, I mean building an army of robots to steal a safe that contains the Krabby Patty formula. As such, it's up to SpongeBob and pals to find the safe's 3 keys before plucky little Plankton can. Gameplay takes the form of a third-person action adventure, and so players must make their way through the different levels, fending off enemies as they go until they reach a boss. Each of the playable characters can utilize a melee attack or a variety of gizmos, which are essentially guns, but a bit more family-friendly. Plankton's Robotic Revenge looked decent enough and controlled well, but it was entirely lacking in the entertainment department. Though there were 3 different areas to explore, one for each of the missing save keys, none of them were distinct from one another, and players found themselves battling the same few copy-pasted enemies over and over again, which would have been fine had the combat not been utterly dull. This one's another offering that was probably fine for small kids, who often don't mind doing the same thing over and over again, but its only function for adults would probably be as part of some elaborate revenge plot against someone who'd wronged them in some way. Number 27. SpongeBob Krusty Cook-Off, 2020, Switch and mobile. If you're looking at the gameplay on screen and thinking to yourself, this looks an awful lot like one of those mobile games where you have to build burgers as quickly as possible and get them out to impatient customers, then you wouldn't be far off the mark actually, as SpongeBob Krusty Cook-Off did, in fact, start life as a mobile game. But Ben, you howl, I thought you weren't including mobile titles on this list. Well, dear viewer, we're not, but SpongeBob Krusty Cook-Off also got a release for the Switch, so here we are. The game plays very similarly to the likes of Cooking Fever. Players start out with a basic restaurant and must serve simple dishes to customers within a certain amount of time. As they progress though, they'll unlock more ingredients, dishes become more complicated, orders start to pile up, and things get incredibly stressful. Critics didn't hate the game. The simple to understand but tricky to master gameplay was reasonably well received, and the fact that microtransactions had been stripped out of the Switch version of the game was welcomed with open arms. Alas, Krusty Cook-Off was considered quite repetitive, and though the core gameplay loop was thought to be quite addictive, it didn't hold players' attention for long. Furthermore, despite the Switch having a touchscreen, the Switch version of the game didn't have touch controls, and as such was much more difficult to get to grips with than its mobile counterpart. All of this is to say that SpongeBob Krusty Cook-Off is a title that's a bit half-baked. Number 26. The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie, 2004, Game Boy Advance. We come now to the first game we've had to separate into 2 different entries, and the reason that the Game Boy Advance version of the SpongeBob SquarePants Movie The Game is so much lower down on this list than its home console and PC counterparts is simply because it's an inferior experience. The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie The Game more or less follows the plot of the film, and the plot is thus: that no-good Plankton has stolen King Neptune's crown, and SpongeBob and Patrick are tasked with retrieving it from Shell City. On the Game Boy Advance, the SpongeBob SquarePants Movie The Game is a 2D platformer that's set across 6 different worlds, each of which has a boss to defeat at the end. There are also a variety of bonus levels on offer, but on the flip side, the game lacks a save feature, instead relying on a password system, and tells the story through still images rather than animated cutscenes. Critics weren't exactly kind to the handheld title, lamenting that some of the platforming was incredibly tricky, the gameplay was repetitive, and the inclusion of Patrick as a playable character didn't really add anything. Furthermore, the story felt like something of an afterthought, as it really didn't tie each of the levels together, leaving players feeling like it had simply been tacked on rather than properly incorporated. The graphics and music did garner some praise, but if you were just after something that looked and sounded good, you'd have been better off going and seeing the movie, really. Number 25. SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends in Freeze Frame Frenzy, 2004, Game Boy Advance. The first handheld exclusive offering on today's list is SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends in Freeze Frame Frenzy, though the only frenzy on offer is a frenzy of gamers trying to get the hell away from it. SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends in Freeze Frame Frenzy, or Nicktoons Freeze Frame Frenzy if you want to get everywhere outside of PAL regions about this, sees multiple Nickelodeon characters being misplaced into each other's worlds, and it's up to the likes of SpongeBob, Timmy Turner, and Tommy Pickles to right the situation by utilizing the Neutrino Cam 4000, an invention of Jimmy Neutrons that will teleport the characters back to their own worlds. In each level, players must acquire a set number of points by photographing different things, including the out-of-place characters and level-specific subjects like jellyfish in Bikini Bottom. Truly riveting stuff. Critics weren't exactly lining up to review this one, and those that did weren't all that impressed with it. The roster of fan-favourite Nickelodeon characters was largely well received, but aside from that, there was little to write home about. Unlike other photography games such as Pokemon Snap, Freeze Frame Frenzy was a 2D affair, and as such there was very little in the way of challenge, as most levels could be passed by simply hammering the Take Picture button over and over again. The game was also criticised for its short length, though considering how dull it was, that might not be such a bad thing. The general consensus was that Freeze Frame Frenzy was fine for the very small children that it was aimed at, but a relatively lackluster affair for anyone with the ability to count past 10. Oh no, that's not me. I can't do that. Sorry, go on, Peter.
Number 24. SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends Unite, 2005. PS2, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and DS. No, this isn't a game about SpongeBob and Squidward finally unionizing and demanding fair pay from that stingy Mr. Krabs, but it is instead an action-adventure title in which various Nickelodeon heroes, SpongeBob included, team up to take on several Nicktoons villains. SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends Unite kicks off when SpongeBob discovers that the dastardly Plankton plans to take over Bikini Bottom using an array of ginormous vacuum machines. After receiving a message from Jimmy Neutron's dog, Goddard, he enters a portal which leads him to Jimmy, Timmy Turner, and Danny Phantom. Jimmy explains that his latest invention, the Universe Portal Machine, has been copied by Professor Calamitous, who, alongside Plankton, Vlad Plasmius, and Denzel Crocker, plans to use it to steal energy from their respective worlds. Each of the game's 4 protagonists appears in every level, with them having their own unique abilities. For example, Timmy's freeze glove can freeze water, and Jimmy Neutron's flare functions as a long-range weapon. All versions of the game are 3D action-adventure platformers, except for the GBA build, which is in 2D, presumably due to the system's lack of power. SpongeBob SquarePants and Friends Unite, or Nicktoons Unite if you don't want to get pally about this, got a tepid response from critics, and the reason for that is that everything about it was mediocre. The graphics were fine, but not groundbreaking. The game worked, but the gameplay neither pushed the envelope nor was it particularly exciting, and the lack of character voiceovers was a somewhat baffling choice on the part of those involved in the game's creation. Still, at least we can all unite in the view that this is one very average video game. Number 23, SpongeBob SquarePants Underpants Slam, 2007, Xbox 360. I'm not gonna lie, Underpants Slam sounds more like something you'd be forced to look up on Urban Dictionary than it does a family-friendly video game, but hey-ho. Released exclusively on the Xbox Live Arcade, SpongeBob SquarePants Underpants Slam sees SpongeBob, Patrick, Mr. Krabs, Plankton, and Sandy embarking on a mission to locate Neptune's underwear after a current storm spreads a shipment of the Lord of the Sea's unmentionables all across the ocean floor. In each of the game's 9 levels, players must gather 99 pairs of Y-fronts, which for anyone counting means that Neptune has lost 891 undergarments, which is frankly far too many. Most pairs are scattered about each level, while some are hidden in barrels or other objects, or have been stolen by jellyfish, whom the player must fight in order to retrieve them. Additionally, players can find pickups, some of which are useful, like a magnet that attracts the undies, and some of which are a hindrance, such as one that reverses the controls. Underpants Slam garnered middling review scores because although it was quite fun for a couple of levels and looked and functioned just fine, at the end of the day it was nothing more than a collectathon, and a relatively monotonous one at that. To make matters worse, although the $10 title boasted 9 levels, players only got to explore 3 different locales, so there wasn't even that much visual variety to proceedings. This one is another example of a game that small children would probably find entertaining, but that everyone else would think was a little bit pants. Number 22, SpongeBob vs. the Big One Beach Party Cook-Off, 2009, DS. Right, that's enough underpants collecting. Let's get cooking. Oh, but wash your hands first, hey, you filthy lot. It's that time of year again. Jack Kahuna Laguna is throwing his annual beach party, and he needs someone to do the catering. Both Mr. Krabs and Plankton put themselves forward, so Jack decides the only way to choose who provides the food is with a cook-off. Both are short on staff, however, so Mr. Krabs ends up recruiting Plankton's cousins after the frugal copepod refuses to pay them for their efforts, and it falls to SpongeBob to train them. The game is somewhat akin to titles like Cooking Mama, so players will find themselves chopping ingredients and frying meat, all with the aim of serving up a perfect dish. If they get a little lonely, there's a multiplayer mode, which allows players to compete with their friends to see who can prepare the dishes the quickest. Beach Party Cook-Off didn't exactly set the world of gaming ablaze, though, and whilst it had merits, it wasn't without its issues. The graphics were nice and colourful, and the quips from fan-favourite characters would surely have delighted anyone who loved the show, but on the whole, the title was quite a shallow affair with repetitive gameplay and a severe lack of challenge for anyone over the age of about 8. Additionally, some found the controls to be a little hit and miss, so even those who liked their games on the simple side might have struggled here. Suffice it to say that this is one dish that would probably get sent back to the kitchen. Number 21. SpongeBob SquarePants Employee of the Month, 2002, PC. If you've ever watched SpongeBob SquarePants, you'll know that the giddy sea sponge takes his job as a fry cook at the Krusty Krab very seriously. It's no surprise then that in SpongeBob SquarePants Employee of the Month, he's won not just the Employee of the Month award, but Employee of the Year, and is now the proud owner of a pair of tickets to Neptune's Paradise, a local theme park. Sadly, things almost immediately go awry, and SpongeBob and Patrick have an absolute nightmare actually getting to the theme park, struggling to find the money for the bus, getting stuck in rock bottom, and crashing a rocket into the affluent town of Bottoms Up. Honestly, if I had a quid for every time that's happened to me. Pointing and clicking is the order of the day here, and as such, players must explore each level, collecting items as they go, and combining them in order to proceed. There are also a number of videotapes hidden throughout the game, which unlock footage chronicling the game's development. Employee of the Month didn't do too terribly with critics, and whilst there was some skepticism about the game's length and lack of replay value, most agreed that the fun gameplay and colourful graphics would make it a good investment for puzzle-loving children. The title was considered to be lacking challenge though, so it's unlikely that seasoned gamers would have gotten much out of it. But then again, they're not who this was aimed at. All things considered, the game might not have been Employee of the Month, but it certainly wouldn't have been in line for a P45. That's a joke that only works for people living in the UK. Number 20. SpongeBob and Friends Attack of the Toybots, 2007. PS2, Wii, Game Boy Advance, and DS. Another title from the SpongeBob and Friends series now, and this time the pineapple-dwelling sea sponge is forced to team up with a variety of pals to see off the Toybot threat. The game begins with Professor Calamitous, arch-nemesis of Jimmy Neutron, appearing as a contestant on reality show The Biggest Genius, where he reveals that feeding Krabby Patties to fairies causes them to emit a gas that can power his Toybots, an army of evil robot duplicates of abducted heroes. While SpongeBob and Patrick are delivering several million of the delicious-looking burgers to a nearby Toybot factory, Patrick is captured and it's left to SpongeBob to free his friend and all of the other Nicktoons heroes that have been kidnapped by Calamitous. Gameplay largely consists of platforming, and players get the opportunity to take control of a number of fan-favourite cartoon characters, not just including the folks from SpongeBob SquarePants, but also the stars of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, The Fairly Odd Parents, Danny Phantom, Invader Zim, Rocko's Modern Life, and many more. Attack of the Toybots actually got an okay-ish reception from critics, and whilst most thought it was a bit on the short side, somewhat repetitive, and far from being the best video game ever made, it wasn't without its merits. The wide variety of Nickelodeon characters in the title was praised, as was the multiplayer, the vast array of unlockables, and the voice work. It probably wouldn't impress a Soulsborne fan, but it would absolutely be a hit with the Nicktoons-loving child in your life. Number 19. SpongeBob SquarePants Legend of the Lost Spatula, 2001, Game Boy Color. I'm not gonna lie, Legend of the Lost Spatula really sounds like a title that was a 5:15 PM on a Friday night job when everyone in the video game ideas department at Vicarious Visions just wanted to get down the pub. It turns out, though, that as daft as the moniker is, the game, as SpongeBob games go, isn't bad. Legend of the Lost Spatula is the oldest title on today's list, having been released in March 2001, and focuses its attention squarely on everyone's favourite yellow sea snail-owning sponge. It's SpongeBob's ambition to be the very best fry cook in all of the ocean, so he embarks on a quest to find the Golden Spatula, a legendary piece of kitchen equipment that lies somewhere in the Flying Dutchman's underworld. The game is a fairly standard platformer, so players can expect lots of jumping around, tackling enemies, and collecting goodies. The twist, though, is that if SpongeBob gets hit by an enemy at any point, his clothes will fall off, leaving the square pants-wearing protagonist embarrassingly square pantsless. Although Legend of the Lost Spatula failed to leave a lasting impression on critics, most were able to see it for what it was, a colourful licensed game with a cheery soundtrack for small children. The gameplay was, somewhat ironically for a game set at the bottom of the ocean, lacking depth, and was rather repetitive. But the graphics were nice and bright, the music was funky, and the story was classic SpongeBob fare that would surely appeal to the kiddos that enjoyed the show. Number 18. SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom, 2008, PS2, Wii, and DS. Without getting too detailed, Globs of Doom sounds more like what happens in my toilet the morning after Domino's, rather than a reasonably okay video game. Sorry, I fear I may have overshared there. Anyway, in Globs of Doom, SpongeBob is once again joined by an array of fan-favourite Nicktoons characters, who must all work together to stop the evil syndicate from using goo to turn their friends into Morphoids, presumably so that they can use them to take over the multiverse. In each level, the character du jour must defeat globified enemies, collect coins which can be spent on upgrades, and take on a variety of bosses, all with the aim of putting a stop to the syndicate and their somewhat gooey plans. Each character has their own special weapon. For example, Zim has a plunger that can not only be used to whack enemies, but also to draw them nearer, and once the weapon has been used enough, a special attack will become available. Whilst the environments and cast of characters in Globs of Doom were quite diverse, the gameplay wasn't, with each level barely differing from the last. Still, critics conceded that despite the somewhat monotonous gameplay, fans of Nicktoons would probably enjoy the game, if only because it gave them the opportunity to spend some time with their favourite cartoon characters and smack things over the head with a plunger, a behaviour that we've been desperately trying to train out of James. No, James, put the plunger down! Number 17. SpongeBob SquarePants Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, 2002, PS2, GameCube, and Game Boy Advance. According to legend, the Flying Dutchman is a ghost ship that's unable to make port and is instead doomed to sail the seven seas for all eternity. In the world of SpongeBob SquarePants, the Flying Dutchman is a pirate ghost who collects souls and the discarded socks of Monkeys singer Davy Jones, which he keeps in a locker. Get it? Don't worry if you don't, it's a bit of a thinker. But what does this stinky sock-swiping spectre want revenge for in Revenge of the Flying Dutchman? Well, our pal SpongeBob has gotten into a bit of bother because his pet snail, Gary, has dug up a treasure chest containing a bottle, which SpongeBob proceeds to rub, releasing the Flying Dutchman, who immediately kidnaps Gary. So, in short, SpongeBob awakens him from a nap, and he's mad pissed off about it. The gameplay in Revenge of the Flying Dutchman differs depending on whether you're playing on home console or handheld. On PS2 and GameCube, the game is a 3D platformer, and players must collect letter tiles and then solve sliding puzzles so they can find where to locate the next treasure. The Game Boy Advance version, on the other hand, is a side-scrolling platformer, which tasks players with locating treasures and doubloons. Despite the differences in gameplay, though, both the home console and handheld versions of Revenge of the Flying Dutchman got roughly the same response from critics, who felt that the actual gameplay was fairly mediocre, but that the colourful graphics, goofy music, and cast of characters would no doubt appeal to the small children the title was aimed at. Number 16. SpongeBob's Atlantis SquarePantis, 2007, PS2, Wii, Game Boy Advance, and DS. We hope the good people behind this particular game didn't pull any muscles when naming it. After all, rhyming Atlantis with SquarePantis is one hell of a stretch. In this 2007 title for the PS2, Wii, Game Boy Advance, and DS, SpongeBob and pals find themselves in possession of an amulet that reveals the path to the fabled underwater city of Atlantis. Naturally, said path is a bus that's powered by singing, because reasons, and unfortunately, the bus crashes thanks to Patrick, and the gang are stranded in the mythical settlement until they can repair it. A mangled megabus is the least of their problems though, as stowaway Plankton has set his sights on Atlantis' advanced technology and plans to use its arsenal to take over the world. The main difference between the Game Boy Advance version of the title and the others is that the GBA edition is a 2D side-scroller, owing to the hardware's technical limitations, whereas the others are in glorious 3D. In all versions, though, each character has their own unique abilities which can be used for accomplishing different tasks. So Mr. Krabs has his magical money-grabbing pockets which draw him towards cash, whereas Patrick is super strong, so he can lift other characters and throw anchors. All versions of Atlantis SquarePantis garnered a reasonable response from critics, who once again felt that the game was fine for the young kids it was targeted at, but didn't offer much to seasoned gamers. Anyone under the age of 10 with a passing interest in SpongeBob SquarePants would have probably had quite a nice time with the simplistic gameplay and the series' trademark humour, but anyone older would have quickly gotten bored. Number 15. SpongeBob SquarePants The Yellow Avenger, 2005, DS and PSP. There are some who feel that the MCU has gotten a bit oversaturated, and in my opinion, a crossover with the residents of Bikini Bottom is exactly what's needed to reinvigorate the series. Sadly, SpongeBob SquarePants The Yellow Avenger is not a game in which SpongeBob teams up with the likes of Captain America and Iron Man, although it is superhero themed, so we're partway there at least. In The Yellow Avenger, SpongeBob gains Mermaid Man's powers after donning his belt. However, he also causes chaos when he puts the dirty bubble into a washing machine, which causes the villain to split into a whole load more dirty bubbles. Using his newfound abilities, SpongeBob must defeat not only Dirty Bubble, but a variety of other villains as well, such as Man Ray, the Sinister Slug, and Jumbo Shrimp. The game is a side-scroller, with the main focus being on exploration and discovery. On the DS, players can use the stylus to interact with objects, and SpongeBob can learn special abilities which can be summoned by drawing on the touchscreen. Critics weren't totally displeased with The Yellow Avenger and gave praise to its graphics, the platforming, and the implementation of the drawing mechanics in the DS version. That being said, some of the gameplay did get a bit tedious after a while, the PSP didn't have a stylus to spice things up, and the load times were nothing short of laughable in places. Still, if you were a youngster and liked the idea of SpongeBob getting superpowers, then this would probably have been the game for you. Ben?
Number 14. SpongeBob SquarePants Lights, Camera, Pants, 2005. PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and Game Boy Advance. Big news! It's the anniversary of the new adventures of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, and the town of Bikini Bottom is producing a special episode of the show. Talent scouts are on the lookout for an up-and-coming actor to play the show's villain, and wouldn't you know it, SpongeBob is eyeing up the role. Sadly, so are his friends, so he'll have to pull out all of the stops if he's going to impress the scouts and nail the audition. The plot of the Game Boy Advance version of Lights, Camera, Pants differs ever so slightly and sees SpongeBob and friends trying to locate the show's stars instead of fighting for a role. The PS2, Xbox, and GameCube versions of the game task players with competing in a selection of mini-games, and although there is a large number on offer, the goal in all of them is to score more points than your opponents, which can be either AI or human. The Game Boy Advance version has mini-games as well, but it also has platforming and driving levels. Lights, Camera, Pants didn't do too badly with reviewers, and although the gameplay was considered a little shallow and the dialogue repetitive, players had fun with the selection of mini-games and the fun storyline. Was it the best game of all time? No. But would it kill a couple of hours in an entertaining way? As long as you switched off your brain, then maybe. A version of Lights, Camera, Pants was also released for PC, however it's A, an almost entirely different gameplay experience, and 2, quite a bit better than the console version, so we'll tell you about it in a short while. Number 13. SpongeBob SquarePants Super Sponge, 2001, PlayStation and Game Boy Advance. To be perfectly honest, Super Sponge sounds more like something JML would be peddling than it does a video game. What's next? SpongeBob SquarePants Hurricane Spin Scrubber? Come on. No, actually, write that down. Unlike The Yellow Avenger, which sees SpongeBob taking on Mermaid Man's role, in this 2001 adventure he's charged with undertaking numerous random tasks by the superhero and his sidekick because they're a bit sick of him, And honestly, same. Why won't SpongeBob leave the elderly duo alone? Well, it's Patrick's birthday, and he's desperate to get hold of an autographed photo of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy in order to make Patrick's special day the best ever. The game is broken up into 5 different chapters which all take place in different locations, including Bikini Bottom, Rock Bottom, If You Smell, and the center of the Earth. Each chapter is split into 4 levels, and the aim is to platform through each, collecting spatulas, defeating enemies, and taking on bosses. The PlayStation version of the game also features a secret level called Six Clams Adventureland, which is unlocked once players collect enough spatulas in each chapter. Super Sponge got a mixed reception from critics, some of whom bestowed it with scores in the mid-30s, whilst others felt it was more at home in the low 80s. Generally though, it was agreed that the visuals were appealing, the voice acting was excellent, and the story was intriguing. However, the gameplay was quite repetitive and simplistic, so it wouldn't remain entertaining for very long. Luckily, its runtime was only around an hour, so it's not like players had to sacrifice days of their lives to complete it. A small mercy. Number 12. SpongeBob SquarePants, 2011. Wii and 3DS. More mini-games for you now, and when we say these games are small, oh boy or girl or other do we mean it. Borrowing heavily from the WarioWare series, SpongeBob SquarePants is a collection of over 100 nano games, each of which only takes a few seconds to complete. Examples include the X-Ray Factor, in which players must drag an X-ray machine over Patrick until they find the Krabby Patty he's eaten, Sing a Song of SpongeBob, which requires the player to help SpongeBob play the guitar, and Sting or Swim, where players simply need to draw a circle around all of the blue jellyfish. The version for the Wii utilizes the U-Draw game tablet, a peripheral with a pen and a drawing surface that connects to the console by housing the Wiimote. On the 3DS, players control the game using the touchscreen and the stylus, so no need for any fancy additional hardware there. SpongeBob SquarePants didn't do too badly with critics, and although some did doubt that it would appeal to adults, they still felt it had value. The audiovisual presentation was praised, as was the silly humor and the use of the nano game format. What let the title down was the lack of said nano games, and whilst 100 might sound like a lot, when you take into account that each only lasted a few seconds, the game wasn't exactly what you'd call good value for money, and you all know how us northerners here at Team Triple Jump feel about getting our money's worth. Okay, I'm actually southern, but we like getting our money's worth too. Stop gatekeeping frugality, northerners. Number 11. SpongeBob and Friends Battle for Volcano Island, 2006. PS2, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and DS. Now, I'm not necessarily saying we should slap these kids with an ASBO or anything, but it really does feel like wherever SpongeBob and his gang go, trouble follows. Just, if the authorities are watching, keep an eye on that lot, yeah? In Battle for Volcano Island, SpongeBob and his bestest chums, Patrick Star, Sandy Cheeks, Danny Phantom, Sam Manson, Timmy Turner, Cosmo, and Wanda, must help a trio of crabs to protect the island from their ancient enemy, the Morgoo. However, just as the crabs are summoning the heroes, the Morgoo breaks free, scattering the Nicktoons characters all across the island, and it's left to SpongeBob and Danny Phantom to find the crew and unite them against the Morgoo. In each level, SpongeBob and his parade of pals undertake a series of platforming challenges, and the whole thing culminates in a tense battle against the fearsome Morgoo. Enemies can be tackled by punching and kicking them, or if the character has collected enough glowing energy balls, they can unleash a ranged attack instead. To say that Battle for Volcano Island wasn't the best platformer of all time would be something of an understatement, but that doesn't mean that it was a complete washout. The game was a bit on the short side, and it didn't exactly push the envelope with anything it did, but the gameplay was solid, it looked and sounded quite nice, the voice acting was fairly decent, and on the whole, it was a good bit of fun for younger gamers who preferred it when their digital entertainment wasn't too taxing. Number 10. SpongeBob SquarePants Movin' with Friends, 2004, PS2. I hope you're not sick of minigames and silly peripherals, because we've got even more for you now, courtesy of SpongeBob SquarePants Movin' with Friends. This PS2 exclusive, which was known as Nicktoons Movin' outside of the PAL region, utilizes the iToy to put players in the game. The title is made up of a variety of minigames, including the likes of Bikini Bottom Bowling, Krabby Patty Match, and Jellyfish Jam, which are all controlled by the player moving their upper body back and forth. In total, 13 different minigames are available, and if players feel a bit silly tackling them alone, then they can rope in up to 7 friends to compete in the multiplayer mode. Not many critics gave Movin' with Friends the time of day, but those that did thought it wasn't half bad. The minigames offered enough variety to make it worth playing through them all, the presentation was fairly good, and the number of Nicktoons characters that showed up would surely have put a smile on the faces of young fans. The one thing that let Movin' with Friends down was the iToy itself, as like many other non-traditional video video game controllers, it couldn't exactly be relied upon to pick up players' inputs consistently. Still, if you could get it to function properly, then SpongeBob SquarePants Move In With Friends was decent entertainment for the young'uns, and if nothing else, it would have tired them out enough to keep them quiet for a bit. Please. Number 9. SpongeBob SquarePants Typing, 2004, PC. Usually we wouldn't include edutainment games on a list like this, but SpongeBob SquarePants Typing was really well received by critics, so we felt compelled to make a special exception just this once. When Mr. Krabs finds an old typewriter in a dumpster, he decides to put it to good use to make himself even more money. Though his initial endeavour, which involves putting the typewriter in a burger, fails spectacularly, I wonder why, he's soon raking it in when he unveils the Bikini Bottom Typing Tournament. It's $5 to enter, and the grand prize is a nut, butter and jellyfish jelly sandwich, and although I personally can't think of anything worse, the residents of Bikini Bottom are literally queuing up to enter, including SpongeBob himself, though he admits that he has no idea how to type. Players are taught to touch type in a series of lessons and can continue to hone their skills using the game's practice mode. Between lessons, the player gets to put what they've learned into action with mini-games that test their typing prowess, including a colouring game and a maze game where SpongeBob must recover Patrick's senses after he loses them. Now, if you're a small child that 1. Is a fan of SpongeBob SquarePants and B. needs to learn how to type, then you're probably not the target audience of SpongeBob SquarePants Typing. Those who do fit into both of those categories, however, would have had a great time with the colourful animations, excellent music and voice acting, and lessons that actually made learning quite fun. Come to think of it, I might recommend this one to our writer, who despite having been able to use a computer since childhood, still can't touch type. Be better, cat. Be better.
Number 8. SpongeBob SquarePants Diner Dash, 2006, PC and mobile. Yes, it's another title that started out on mobile, but don't let that put you off, because this one isn't bad. It's not exactly Ocarina of Time levels of good, but it's not awful either. SpongeBob SquarePants Diner Dash begins with Mr. Krabs pondering what's missing from his life. But before you worry that we're getting into existential crisis territory, he soon comes to the conclusion that despite being a successful businessman, he wishes he had even more success and sets his sights on a restaurant empire. Naturally, it falls to SpongeBob to put in all of the actual hard work because, capitalists got a capitalist, and the fry cook is forced to start working his way up the server career ladder. In each level, players must guide SpongeBob as he waits tables, from seating customers and taking their orders, to serving their food, delivering their bill, and cleaning up after them. In each level, SpongeBob must earn a certain amount of money, and although things start out quite straightforward, as he has to juggle more and more customers, things can get quite hectic. Once enough money has been collected, Mr. Krabs will open a new restaurant, and SpongeBob will earn himself a tasty promotion. Though it was another title that didn't exactly set the gaming world ablaze, those who did play Diner Dash really rather enjoyed it. The gameplay was on the somewhat repetitive side, but the increasing level of challenge meant that this didn't really matter, and the colourful visuals and cheery music helped to keep the experience pleasant. It might not have been a title for the hardcore gamer, but for those who took a more casual approach to the medium, this one would have served them well. Number 7. SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, 2020. PS4, Xbox One, Switch, Stadia, PC, and mobile. We come now to the only remake on today's list, and honestly, I'm just as shocked as you are that there haven't been more, what with the astounding quality displayed by the SpongeBob SquarePants video game franchise over the years. Rehydrated is a remake of 2003's Battle for Bikini Bottom, which we'll come to shortly, and sees SpongeBob and friends platforming their way around Bikini Bottom in order to collect shiny objects, golden spatulas, and socks, all whilst defeating robots that Plankton has created using the Duplicatortron 3000. The default character is SpongeBob, of course. However, players can switch to either Patrick or Sandy by visiting a bus stop. Though it's bad news for those of you who prefer starfish and squirrels to sea sponges, as Patrick and Sandy don't get to share levels. You can have one or the other, you greedy lot, not both. The remake features updated visuals and sound, new voice recordings from the English, French, German, Italian, Spanish, Latin American, Polish, and Japanese voice casts, and includes the multiplayer Horde mode, which incorporates cut content from the original, such as a fight with a robotic Squidward. The critical response to Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated was a little mixed, but generally the compliments outweighed the criticism. The gameplay was thought to be lacking in challenge, and the character swapping mechanic was considered annoying, but the updated visuals really brought the world to life, and the series' trademark goofy humour was present throughout. It might have been rehydrated, but it certainly wasn't a damp squib. Or should that be squid? No, it's squib. Number 6. Drawn to Life SpongeBob SquarePants Edition, 2008, DS. In the mid-2000s, a game released for the DS called Drawn to Life, and it proved to be a hit with audiences who enjoyed the fact that they could create their own characters, level objects, and accessories simply by drawing them with the DS stylus. Since it was popular, the game got a sequel, and then another, and eventually a SpongeBob SquarePants spin-off, which of course is the natural progression of all things in the universe. The story of Drawn to Life SpongeBob SquarePants Edition begins when an artist accidentally drops 2 magic pencils into the sea. When one falls into Patrick's hands, he immediately draws Doodle Bob, the one thing he'd been forbidden from committing to paper, and the little git comes to life, steals the pencil, and immediately heads to downtown Bikini Bottom to start causing havoc. Thankfully, SpongeBob and Patrick have another pencil, and they're able to draw a hero to save the day. At its core, Drawn to Life SpongeBob Edition is a platformer. However, like its predecessors, it puts an interesting spin on the gameplay by allowing players to draw their own protagonist and giving them the opportunity to draw items that will be useful in each level. When it came to the critical response, this one was a bit polarizing. Some bestowed scores in the 80s and praised the interesting gameplay mechanics, whilst others were less kind and felt that the portrayal of the characters fell a bit flat. On the whole though, most reviewers enjoyed the game, and while some felt that it wasn't as good as the original Drawn to Life, they conceded it was a must-play for anyone with a love of drawing and SpongeBob SquarePants. I don't know what that Venn diagram looks like, but it probably exists. Number 5. SpongeBob SquarePants Lights, Camera, Pants, 2005, PC. No, you've not gotten stuck in some sort of Groundhog Day-style pants time loop. This is the second edition of SpongeBob SquarePants Lights, Camera, Pants, and the reason for that is that the PC version is a whole lot better than the home console editions of the game. Everywhere but the PC, Lights, Camera, Pants is little more than a collection of minigames. However, the experience that Windows players got was one of the point-and-click variety. The overall premise is very similar to that in the home console and handheld versions. A Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy anniversary show is planned, and SpongeBob decides to audition for a supporting role. When he meets the director, however, he learns that no one else turned up to the audition, and as such, the show is cancelled. Not wanting to let an opportunity for fame and fortune pass him by though, SpongeBob volunteers to find a cast and save the show. The game is fairly standard point-and-click fare, so players will find themselves wandering each scene, interacting with people and objects, and occasionally solving puzzles or playing minigames. The game was definitely aimed at small children, and as such, the actual gameplay was somewhat simplistic, but the bright, colourful graphics were appealing to anyone, the voice acting was quite good, the music was funky, and the show's silly humour was still present. Fans of point-and-click classics like The Secret of Monkey Island wouldn't have been impressed by this one, but it might just have gotten their kids interested in the genre. Number 4. SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake, 2023, PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. We come now to the most recent game on today's list, SpongeBob SquarePants The Cosmic Shake, released in January 2023. A spiritual successor to Battle for Bikini Bottom, The Cosmic Shake sees SpongeBob and Patrick travelling to a number of different wish worlds in order to save Bikini Bottom after they inadvertently blow bubbles using mermaid tears owned by King Neptune. Along the way, they are assisted by Madame Cassandra, who gives SpongeBob a special costume for every Wish World he visits in exchange for cosmic jelly. And no, that's not a euphemism. When it comes to the gameplay, we've got ourselves another platformer here, and players must traverse each of the differently themed worlds as SpongeBob, with a little help from Patrick, who's regrettably been turned into a balloon. The Cosmic Shake went down fairly well with critics, who were impressed with the selection of Wish Worlds and the creativity of their design. It captured the spirit of the TV show well, the platforming and puzzles were solid, and it was a fantastic homage to the original Battle for Bikini Bottom. There were some who found the game a little shallow though, again ironic for a game set at the bottom of the ocean, and there were a few glitches to be found here and there, but on the whole, the Cosmic Shake was considered to be a fairly good 3D platformer that would certainly appeal to kids, and might even be an enjoyable experience for their video game loving parents as well. Number 3. SpongeBob SquarePants Creature from the Krusty Krab, 2006, PS2, GameCube, Wii, PC, Game Boy Advance, and DS. I was about to call out how silly it was for the studio behind Creature from the Krusty Krab not to spell creature with a K as well, because, you know, alliteration. But then I realised that associating SpongeBob with 3 Ks in quick succession would probably be a PR nightmare. Anyway, moving swiftly on, Creature from the Krusty Krab takes place inside the dreams of SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton. In SpongeBob's, his bed turns into a hot rod, which he races in until he accidentally drives it into a pit where he gets eaten by a giant worm and meets Old Man Jenkins, no, not that one, who's building a biplane to escape the worm. In Patrick's dream, he's a superhero called Starfish Man, who pursues the dastardly, dreaded Patrick, but gets knocked out and tied to a rocket. Finally, in Plankton's dream, he attempts to use an enlargement ray on a crumb of Krabby Patty so he can learn the formula, but goes too far and accidentally creates a gigantic Krabby Patty monster. Honestly, the entire game is bat-plops mad. Players make their way through these insane scenarios in a variety of ways, such as racing, platforming, flying in a plane, and rampaging around as oversized plankton. Critics were quite impressed by Creature from the Krusty Krab, citing its ambitious premise, variety of different gameplay styles, and brilliant level design as reasons to play the game. They were less than impressed with the controls on the Wii, however. That being said, I imagine the Wii itself was as much to blame as the game was, and on other platforms it controlled nicely. In short, a great time if you overlook the Wii, a bit like hanging out with Old Man Jenkins. Number 2. SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, 2003, PS2, Xbox, GameCube, PC, and Game Boy Advance. As reasonably good as Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated was, it was unable to live up to the original Battle for Bikini Bottom. Well, if the critics are to be believed anyway. Plankton is once again after that Krabby Patty formula, and this time he's built an army of robots that he plans to use to steal it. Unfortunately, he's not done his due diligence and has accidentally set them all to don't obey, and as such, they begin wreaking havoc all over Bikini Bottom. He's not really one for cleaning up his own messes though, so it falls to SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy to save the day. Players will get a different gameplay experience depending on which platform they choose. The home console version is a 3D platformer, where the aim is to collect items and defeat the robots. The PC version features minigames that players must complete by finding different objects, and the Game Boy Advance version is a 2D platformer and is much more linear than the home console edition. Though you won't find it on any best video games of all time lists, Battle for Bikini Bottom was considered to be a rather good title. The gameplay might have been a bit generic, but the graphics, zany humour, and tight controls more than made up for it. Definitely not a title for hardcore gamers, but plenty of fun for those who just want to enjoy some time with their favourite tie-wearing sea sponge.
Number 1. The SpongeBob SquarePants Movie, 2004, PS2, Xbox, GameCube, PC, and mobile. Oh, what's that chill? It must be hell freezing over because according to our research, the film tie-in for the SpongeBob SquarePants movie is in the number 1 spot. A movie tie-in at number 1! Oh Christ, I think I just saw a pig fly past the window. Indeed, according to our extensive research, the best SpongeBob SquarePants video game of all time is the one that's based on the little yellow sea sponge's first foray into cinema. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie, The Game, loosely follows the plot of the film. Plankton has stolen King Neptune's crown and it's left up to SpongeBob and Patrick to head to Shell City and retrieve it because, you know, they certainly are qualified, ?
Across 18 levels, players control both SpongeBob and Patrick, each of whom have their own unique abilities, and they must complete the main objectives, side quests, and defeat bosses in order to obtain Goofy Goober tokens, which allow them to unlock new skills. They can also collect manliness tokens, and once they have enough, they'll be awarded an upgrade point, which can be used on, you guessed it, upgrades. The PC version of the game differs slightly to the home console ones, and is more of a point-and-click adventure akin to the PC edition of Lights, Camera, Pants, though it still follows the same plot and wasn't too far behind the console versions in the review stakes, not like that rubbish Game Boy Advance version we talked about earlier.
It didn't quite achieve critical acclaim, but the SpongeBob SquarePants movie The Game still went down quite well with critics. The gameplay was fun, the controls were nice and responsive, the camera did what it was supposed to, and the movie's humour seeped from the game like water from an agitated sponge.
You might say that despite a few flaws, critics couldn't help but love it. You might say it, I wouldn't. You should be ashamed of yourselves.